Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. Welcome to the February 3rd, 2020 meeting of the Shawnee Planning Commission. We'll start with roll call. Commissioner Montgomery is absent. Commissioner Roth is absent. Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Commissioner Willoughby?
Here.
Commissioner Beanoff?
Here.
Commissioner Busby is here. Commissioner Wise?
Here.
Commissioner Braley?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Nunnick is absent. Commissioner Bingham? Here. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, since we all live in Kansas City, how about them Chiefs?
Well done.
The consent agenda, items 1 through 3 are listed under the consent items agenda. Unless there is a request to remove the items from the consent agenda, the items will be approved in one motion. Is there a request to remove an item from the consent agenda? Commissioner Peterson.
I would like to remove SP-05-20-02 Christ Community Church revised facade at West 62nd Terrace, please.
Thank you. Any other? If not, is there a motion to approve the rest of the consent agenda? Commissioner Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we approve items 1 and 2 on the consent agenda as submitted.
Is there a second? Commissioner Wise?
Second the motion.
Motion is second to approve consented items 1 and 2 on the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. With the item number 3 being pulled out, SP-05-2002, Commissioner Peterson?
I just had some basic questions about this facade. I know that there are 2 businesses that are out of business and they kind of recess. I couldn't tell by the drawings and did not have time to drive by, and I apologize for that. How is that continuity, going to be done? I don't have any problems with the new facade, the door, but I had some curiosity of how that was actually going to take place, because there's awnings and there's windows. Are those staying? The pictures kind of settled on the new facade and not the rest of the building.
Stephanie Malmborg, Community Development. I can answer some of those questions, and I've got the staff report pulled up on the screen because we did not put these images in the typical PowerPoint. If we look through the existing photos here, these were just taken last week, so the pictures are very accurate as to today's current state. And you can see that Planet Fitness is in the east side of this tenant space that was formerly occupied by Hobby Lobby. I've got some other pictures down here further. This is the color rendering. The brick looks a little bit more red than it is orange, but that's just, I tried to note here that it's intended to be the existing brick color. And then this is to the east further, so you can see some of that gray on the canopy overhang. They've got some, I think, wood accents behind the signage here, if I'm not mistaken. A little bit darker gray where you see my cursor sort of around that wood, and then the brick columns here. So just kind of a painting refresh, signage refresh here. And the proposed facade will carry in some of that darker gray that you saw around the blind box. They're also adding significant storefront windows here to bring light into the space. It's a pretty large tenant space, so they want to capture some of that natural light. They have an interior room here that also will be capturing some light with these higher windows under the proposed wall sign, and a couple additional windows on the ground level next to their side entry door. We worked with the applicant quite a bit to get to this particular elevation. There was a lot of back and forth with design because originally they proposed to paint the brick, and painting the brick would have been a very sufficient change. significant change actually to the look of the center as a whole. So we wanted to really make sure to retain that brick as is. It needs a little work in cleaning up itself just because of the previous facade treatments and previous signage, but the applicants worked really hard on making it so that they're able to sort of make their own presence, but also retain that brick, which was important to all of us. So here you can see sort of how they chose to modernize that area by kind of playing with that same color palette you see elsewhere in the strip center and incorporating kind of their own look as well and making it unique. I will say that Planet Fitness, had they come in now, we would want them to carry this gray rather than the beige that they're using on their part of the building. You can see here in some of these photos on the screen, they went with a beige tone for their particular tenant space, and now kind of they're the oddball out because of the improvements with the grays that have happened around them. So I think going forward, with any other vacancies in the shopping center, we would expect that facade treatments kind of followed this modern looking gray color scheme, adding windows kind of along this particular look. Does that answer some of your questions?
Actually, none of them.
None of them?
This is
Okay.
all fine. I'm worried about the west end, where the two
west
existing businesses are. It does not show in
Okay.
any of the renderings or the pictures. So how is that being incorporated? Is there going to be gray over there? Is there going to be more lime green? Not that I have any problem with lime green, but those are very distinct. I know what Who Hot signage looked like, as well as it shows pictures of the west end of the building. Is anything happening with that? I believe it's on this rendering. I think it's architectural page A5.1.
We do not have any proposed plans for the west side of the building at this time. If those tenants wish to make changes to their facades, we do have one existing tenant in there.
So they are not taking over that space?
They're not taking over
was
that portion
not
of the
my-
space.
I did not understand that clearly.
Their
Okay.
tenant space ends sort of where this particular part of the building ends, roughly in that area.
Thank you then. I was just curious why we were showing the west end of the building and mentioning those other businesses and the rendering. So, thank you.
Clarify 2 points. That end of the building is actually owned by Plat Company, who controls the further buildings to the west. And so this is owned by a different owner, and then White Box and the other Incredible Pizza is a separate owner. So they're
Fun.
together. Well, they're not all exactly the same.
Perfect. Thank you. That's the only question I had. I was confused on where the lot line was.
Any other questions for staff on this matter? Commissioner Wise?
Quick question. So the gray, is that a metal panel? I looked and
The gray is actually EFS.
it is EVIS? Okay. So those are those reveals or like metal reveals in the EVIS, or were those just cut joints?
I think getting into that detail, it would be best for the applicant's architect to speak on the specifics. I believe on their plan set there might be more details, but in our report, we were just talking about the specific materials and colors.
Okay, thank you.
Is the applicant present?
The architect's not, the contractor is, so it's actually.
If you'd come up to the, up here to the, the podium, yeah, out there, and I presume it's turned on. If you state your name and address, please.
Joel Smith, Universal Construction, the contractor for the project. So it is a sort of reveal. It's control joints within the EFS. So just very thin, usually about a 1/2 inch reveal.
Okay. And I assume there will be a coping over the EVIS. It's not reflected on this, but it'll be capped.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions for applicant or staff? Commissioner Peterson?
I have a question. At one point in time, we had some issues with EFS preparation. I'm not saying you had anything to do with it, and we came up with some standards. Have you been made aware of what the city standards are, especially in how it is applied? It's usually not the product, it's the application, and I'm not pointing any fingers.
Sure.
I didn't know if they shared that with you.
Well, I'm not sure if that specifically was shared. I know that in going after the building permit, obviously separate of this, the plans and specs were submitted to the city, and we do have those comments back, and there was none notes added, I guess, to the EFS spec portion of it, to my knowledge. So, but that is something that we will be mindful of if that's been an issue in the past, absolutely, so.
Thank you.
Any other questions for applicant or staff? And I presume staff will get together with them and talk about the EFS deals on that, no problem. So Commissioner Peterson, does that satisfy your questions?
Absolutely.
Would you like to make a motion to approve their?
Certainly. I move that we approve SP-05-20-02 Christ Community Church at 13330 West 62nd Terrace facade revision per staff recommendations.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Bingham. There's a motion and a second to approve SP-05-2002 Christ Community Church at 13,330 West 62nd Terrace. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. On to new business, SP-04-2002 and FP-02-2002 Heartland Logistics Park Building Number 1 at the southeast corner of 43rd Street and Clare Road. Final site plan approval and final plat. Staff? Stephanie.
Thank you, Chairman. Stephanie Malmborg, Community Development. And as you mentioned, our next project is Heartland Logistics Park Building Number 1. Just for the record, this was formerly known to the Planning Commission and public as Project Homeland Phase 2. So we'll have to reorient all of our naming in our minds, but all the Project Homeland is now Heartland Logistics Park. So without further ado, this particular project is located west of K7 on 43rd Street in Clare. And the existing site is that southeast corner of 43rd and Clare, as you see on the screen here. It is vacant, and whoever is mowing the site is very, very skilled at straight lines, so you can see there. A very vacant site, and they're proposing approximately 273,000 square foot industrial spec building on the site with improvements such as parking, loading docks for those industrial trailer vehicles heading to the site, landscaping, and obviously utility improvements. And there will be street improvements through our CIP projects through Public Works. As you can see on within the staff report and on the screen here, the future land use map calls for warehouse industrial here. And the property was rezoned to PI, if you recall, back in the fall. Specifically, you can see on the screen here the preliminary site plan approval that was granted. And just for the record, too, I want to go through and list those project numbers for reference. The rezoning was Z061909. The preliminary plat was pre-plat 101909, and the preliminary site plan was SP231909, and these were approved in August of 2019 through Planning Commission, and I'm sorry, they were applied for in August, approved on the September 4th meeting here at Planning Commission, and the City Council approved them on September 23rd, 2019. So we've got the full history there. The preliminary site plan included 325,000 square foot building with about 400 parking spaces and 79 trailer parking spaces and 69 docks. So after reviewing this preliminary site plan and comparing to the proposed final plan we see today, they're pretty much in compliance with each other. The building's a little bit smaller. The parking has been a little bit reduced because of that building size being reduced about 50,000 square feet or so. And they've actually chosen to land bake some of the parking as well so that there's additional green space until such time they will need some of that parking. On the screen now, you can see the applicant's version of the proposed final site plan with all of the land banked parking shown on an aerial image. So if you look at this particular image here, the west side of the building, the majority of the parking you see on the west side, and I'll put my cursor on it here too, this parking will be land banked until they determine that they need it. And then all of the trailer parking south of the aisle will be land banked as well. So they will have the trailer parking directly behind the dock doors on the south side of the building and the parking rows on the east and the north to start out with. We did want to note that all of the bulk requirements are being met. The building height does not exceed the maximum height. Like I said earlier, the building is 272,882 square feet. The lot size is about 23.1 acres, and overall from the preliminary site plan, the main change is that the building has been reduced by about 52,618 square feet. Parking-wise, the proposed parking is 249 spaces for typical vehicles. The trailer parking and docks are 68 of the spaces, and then they've also land banked 37 spaces for car parking and 75 spaces for trailer parking. And we noted in the staff report that since we don't know the tenants, we can't identify the exact parking requirement because each tenant type has a little bit different math. However, we think that including the proposed parking and the land bank parking, they have provided sufficient parking for the needs of the building. We also would like to note that this approval includes approving the construction of any of the land banked parking. So they would be able to just come in administratively to construct that land bank parking rather than come back to the Planning Commission, as long as they're following substantially what they're showing you in this plan packet. So please note that when considering your approval, we are approving the proposed parking and potential future land bank parking. With the landscape plan, because it is a very large site, I'm sure you saw in your plan packet that there was several pages with details of landscaping. The applicant has done a good job of enhancing the site with landscaping and ensuring that there are foundation plantings around the building as well. So this is an excerpt of the main page before you go into the different sheets with each quadrant. They have all of the requirements met for landscaping and a diverse palette of plant material that meets city codes. On your screen now, you can see the color elevations. The top screen is looking at the building from the northwest. So it's actually the northeast corner of the building that you would see as you're driving westbound on 43rd Street toward Clare from K7. And the lower part of the screen is right at that intersection of Clare and 43rd. So you're looking at the northwest corner of the building. The applicant has done a good job making a modern yet almost office-y looking industrial building with the architecture here. They're using a modern sort of box-like design, but also being mindful of colors, the appearance of windows, and really sort of breaking up the facade with some articulation throughout the building. And we thought they did a good job of making it so that it works for either a single tenant look or I believe up to 5 tenants with the way they've broken up the facade and the colors. So it's pretty flexible with tenant design, and we don't have any concerns necessarily of the tenant space being broken up strangely with signage like you'll see on some buildings. The colors they're proposing are sort of a light gray, medium gray, a navy blue, and they call the darkest color you see at the corners there urban bronze. So kind of a bronzy charcoal color, I would imagine. Here Here are the black and white elevations. So you can see here the length of the building. It is over 1,000 feet long on that north and south elevation, so it's important that they did add some articulation in the building that breaks it up. You can see the building height varies in a couple areas in the middle and on each end of the north and south elevations. And then there are some places that recede sort of in the middle of there as well. So it's not just a flat 1,000-foot building, and also the colors really play into making that appearance enhanced as well. So we don't end up with just a plain 1,000-foot wall. The east and west elevations are on the bottom of the screen, and they mirror each other and have that same appearance, again with the corners of the building being a little bit higher, and everywhere you see those black boxes are the windows. They are also proposing a final plat. So before we approved a preliminary plat, and this final plat is in accordance with the preliminary plat. Street improvements was a topic with our preliminary approvals for both this project and Project Homeland 1, which we will probably see come back in the future. The particular improvements we're showing here on the screen are for K7 and 43rd Street, which KDOT will be working on these particular improvements. We do have our transportation manager, Kevin Manning, here tonight if the Planning Commission has any questions about improvements either at this intersection or for 43rd Street. And the second slide here shows the preliminary design for the cross-section for 43rd Street. So I'll just point out really quickly on here, because I know it's hard to read this diagram, but we have currently proposed a 3-lane road here, and you can see ditches on either side. And then on the north side, we're showing a 10-foot trail. So if you imagine this section here, our building we're looking at tonight would be the property line starting right here on the other side of the ditch. We do have some open items, which is why this was not on the consent agenda tonight. These are fire department items that they would like clarification on, and we believe that as long as these items are addressed on plans at building permit stage, that this project can proceed through Planning Commission, as long as they're able to identify aerial access roads and calculate fire hydrants. And our fire marshal, Corey Sands, did actually say they have an excess amount of fire hydrants, so they are overprotected in some ways, so he's not concerned with the ability to get sufficient flow to the site. It's just a matter of some additional information needed on the plans. And with that, that concludes the staff report, but we do have recommendations for approval on both the final site plan and the final plat with some typical conditions. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Stephanie. Is the applicant present? If you come forward and state your name and address, please.
Evening, Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Chip Corcoran. I'm with Renaissance Infrastructure Consulting, 8653 Penrose Lane, Lenexa, Kansas. Stephanie has done a wonderful job of explaining the project, and do want to thank you for helping us through the application process too. I know it was a lot of work with pretty short notice, so I appreciate that. And we've reviewed the staff report and the stipulations, and are comfortable with what's been presented, and we'd be held to. So don't have any further comments, but be happy to answer any questions that you might have of us.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions for applicant or staff? Commissioner Peterson?
Actually, I'm going to admit that I don't exactly know something, so I need to explain it. Is the land banking on the parking on the south side of the building as well as another location? My understanding of land banking is when you buy a piece of property and wait for something to be built on it. So we're technically not building those. Is that it?
So
it's just muddy in my head, sorry.
That's okay. So the terminology that I've used for when you're basically deferring the construction of parking usually is what it is until a later date is land banking the parking. So you're setting aside land that will work for the dimensions you need for that parking. So in this case, if you look at the screen, I'm going to try and get this mouse to show you. So the parking on this west side from about where the building starts all the way down here, they're not going to necessarily construct this right at first unless they get a tenant that right off the bat that they know needs that right away. But they've set it aside so that in the future, if they do find that they need that parking, they know they have room for it and they don't have to necessarily come back for approvals. They don't have to move things around. It's very handy to sort of reserve that space. The other area that they're land banking is for down here, all this trailer parking. And so you may or may not see them construct this right at first. It's going to depend on what their tenant would like and I'm sure their requirements.
So we are basically saying that is available parking and it meets the requirements. They may not use it based on what tenant you guys get, and good luck with that. But it is available should that be necessary.
Correct. But in the meantime, we can enjoy green space, which is preferred to a big concrete parking lot, and will save them money if they end up not actually needing it.
And with that, I don't disagree, but also, can you then go to the landscape map? So that green space up to the property line is going to have 0 trees, even in the land banked spaces, correct? It's only going to be along the east, north, and west sides, not on the south. So it's just going to be grass.
So you'll see along the west side here, they aren't planting necessarily in the middle where that parking would go, but they do have trees that run along what I would call the west buffer yard here. They do have some foundation plantings along the building here that probably would not have to all be ripped up if they were to build this.
Nothing on the south is all I'm asking.
Yeah, on the south, this is a big basin for drainage, and so they don't have anything that's planted because basically between the basin and these trailer spaces, there's not a whole lot of room for them to plant anything.
Are you going to do any special type of vegetation in that ditch? Because it may, not almost like a wetland, not wetland, that's not the right appropriate response, but.
Take that one. So the basins that you see there's 2 types of basins typically that you see. One is for detention, which will let water meet out of the basin, similar to what it did before development. And then there's retention. These are actually retention basins. And so the bottom of the basin will likely be and appear to be sand. The other thing is that those basins have to be maintained. And so typically on a 6-month cycle, they'll go in and till up the bottom of the basin. So the bottom of the basin will be sand, the sides of the basin will be sodded.
Perfect, thanks.
Any other questions for applicant or staff? Commissioner Bienhoff, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the staff. Could you elaborate on the aerial access open item?
Yes, I can.
Not familiar with that.
So let me pull up the slide here. So aerial access roads need to be called out more clearly on the plans. There are many plan sheets within this particular submittal, and typically the fire department has a list of things they like to see on their sheet, and in this case our fire marshal just didn't see some of those things specifically called out. It appears that they have room for all of the necessary fire access, but it has to do with one of their specific vehicles being able to get around the property, have enough width to navigate, as well as get the ladder where it needs to be to fight the fires. So there's a couple bullet points here on the screen that talk about the aerial access road, and we just need to have the details of the widths called out on the plan specifically. And there was just several places where the information wasn't on there, but plenty of other things were. So I'm sure the applicant has no issue just doing a separate sheet that calls out all that information.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions for applicant or staff? Commissioner Braley?
Yeah, it's a question for staff specifically on 43rd Street. So looking at the profile, well, comparing the renderings to the profile, it doesn't appear that it's curb and gutter, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then, so what is the thinking in the future for just that industrial park? Is that how we're going to address that development down there, that will all be shoulder ditches and no curb and gutter?
I'd like to defer the street-related questions to Kevin Manning, if he would come up. Thank you.
Kevin Manning, Transportation Manager. Commissioner Braley, that's correct. Really what's going on out there is that it's just so flat out there. It is very difficult to get that to drain with the traditional drainage system.
Okay.
So that's basically why the ditches are being used. So that is the long-term intent for the road. There's not the intent to go back in the future with curb and gutter.
Okay. For that whole development that's going to occur down there in the future, that's just going to be set as the standard?
Yes, pretty
that.
much for the entirety of 43rd Street. Now, when 43rd Street kind of curves down along the future Riverfront Park.
Right.
That has not been determined. There may be different grade issues that make curb and gutter more feasible, but that would ultimately be a design decision at that point.
Okay.
But for the entirety of this development, both on the plan that's being discussed tonight and on the north side, it would be a ditch section.
Okay. And then, is there improvements along Clare Road along the property?
Yes.
And it will stop at the property line then, correct? Okay. Okay. And then the path's going to be on the building side or across the street?
The path's going to be on the north side of 43rd Street.
North side. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Kevin.
Any other questions for applicant or staff? I have a question for the applicant, and that is there's nothing on here about mechanical units, and I presume you'll put mechanical units in there for air conditioning, heating, et cetera. But I'm not surprised they're not in this plan.
The requirement for screening is incorporated into the plan.
Good, thank you.
But we haven't done the mechanical design yet. That'll be part of the permit set of plans.
Very fine, but you will have screening around them.
Right.
That's your intention.
Your requirements.
Now, question for staff, and that is they don't know the tenant out there. Would it change if there was a company that went in there that was transferring hazmat materials? Would we have a change in how we looked at plans? Because we don't know what's going in out there, so would that come into play later?
If that particular land use requires a special use permit, those special uses would come back to Planning Commission for a special use permit. Any uses that are permitted uses in the PI zoning district are allowed by right, and the applicant would have to consider the parking requirements associated with each of those uses. So we're not going to see this particular project come back unless it's for a special use permit or a modification to these plans.
But design of the building would not need to change if we knew hazmat was going in there. Very good. Very good.
It would most likely be an interior type change, which is not part of the site plan approval. But again, if they make any sort of revisions to the exterior site plan that trigger the need to come back to Planning Commission, that would come back before you.
Thank you very much. Another question for the applicant, Mr. Corcoran. I know the way this is done, just curiously, these big buildings like this, when you go in and divide them up to 3 or 4 businesses, do you put what I would call a safe room from severe storms in any of them? And it's something that popped into my head today looking at this, and I thought, is there a safe place for employees to be in a severe weather?
Typically, they're not setting aside a specific room or space, but they're fully compliant with all the fire codes and emergency response type codes.
Very fine, thank you. Any other questions for applicant or staff? If not, this requires a public hearing. We're in planning discussion. Commissioner Wise?
Just a quick comment. I just want to thank the applicant for doing a good job of breaking up the massing on this large of a building. It's tricky to get 1,000 feet not to look like a 1,000-foot long building, And the use of color and a little bit of massing, again, I know it's still to, precast, but I feel like it's a solid design for this type of facility. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Wise?
We need two motions.
Yeah. Commissioner Wise?
I'll make a motion to approve SP 04-20-02 for Heartland Logistics Park Building Number 1, the southeast corner of 43rd Street and Clare Road, per staff recommendations, the final site plan.
Is there a second? Commissioner Braley?
I'll second that motion.
Is it motion and a second for approval of SP 04-2002 Heartland's Logistics Park Building Number 1 at southeast corner of 43rd and Clare Road? Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Second part of that then. Commissioner Bienhoff.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for the approval of FP-02-20-02 for Heartland Logistics Park, Building Number 1, the southeast corner of 43rd Street and Clare Road, as submitted by staff.
Is there a second? Commissioner Smith.
Second.
Motion and a second for approval of FP 02-2002 Heartland Logistics Park Building Number 1 at the southeast corner of 43rd and Clare Road. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you and welcome to the community.
It's good looking.
That puts us into other business. Does the staff have business for the commissioners?
I do have one thing. I would like to introduce our new business liaison to everyone. I know maybe a couple of you have met him. Tonight we have Steve Hauk, right? Did I say it right this time? You did right. Good. So if you'd like to get to know Steve a little bit, want to come up and give him a spiel? Yes, please do.
My fellow Americans.
Yeah.
Good evening. Steve, you and I have talked via email on a couple of projects. I've spent a lot of time working with your firm in their Wichita office. I really don't know what to tell you other than if you have questions for me, feel free to ask, or unless you want to know something about my background or how I ended up in this wonderful place.
If you wouldn't mind giving us a brief history of your background.
Sure. So most recently, I was working for Professional Service Industries, a Kansas City-based engineering firm that provides geotechnical engineering and materials testing and inspection. And that's what I've been doing for quite a while with other engineering and architectural firms. It's how I've spent most of my career in the business development side and marketing. I worked in Wichita for most of my career and moved up here 2 years ago. My mother, my daughter, and my sister all live here, and as a matter of fact, my daughter Meredith is the assistant city manager in Merriam, right across the railroad tracks. Prior to that, I had a short but illustrious career in television news. Once you lose your hair in television, they're not too interested in you anymore, so I made the transition to business development in the architecture and engineering field.
Mr. Hauk, we welcome you.
Well, thank you.
And
let me say I feel very welcome. Every time I meet people in the community, and the people I work with are extremely talented. I had that conversation with Nolan today about what great people I work with, and I consider myself quite fortunate.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Hauk? If not, we welcome you.
Thank you.
I know you're the one in the background that keeps some of this stuff rolling, so you're a very important cog in what we're doing and what the city is trying to accomplish. So welcome, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Does staff have anything else for the commissioners? Does the commission have anything else? Does the commission have anything else for staff? Commissioner Peterson?
I'm just confirming that our next meeting falls on a Wednesday, correct? Because President's Day is the third Monday.
That is correct. The next meeting is Wednesday, February 19th at 7:30. Sorry if there was any confusion about the previous holiday.
Does the commission have anything else for staff?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Smith.
You know, I found something very interesting as I was traveling last week, being the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, and that was that, I run into people and they say, I'm from Merriam, I'm from Shawnee, I'm from Olathe, I'm from Liberty, I'm from Excelsior Springs, Gladstone. But all of a sudden, everybody was from Kansas City. And I would suppose that happens every time the Chiefs win and the Royals win, that everyone is from Kansas City. And that's the power of sports. That's all. Other than that, I move we adjourn.
Oh, I thought this was going to be a long story. Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Bingham.
I second.
Motion is second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We're done. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Look at that. Bounce right out.
And by the way, our new business development liaison is a fabulous photographer. Steve. He donated 2 pictures to the Shawnee Chamber auction. And I was lucky enough to get one, and it is of a sunset with a windmill, and that's cool. And then he did this other cool one of signs down off of downtown. One's like a park, an old neon sign that was very edgy and just kind of cutting.
Doing well. Yeah. Busy.
For city behavior.